Well, here we are, live streaming. I'm not a big live streamer, I'm afraid to say. However, I decided that doing a live stream would be easier if I had some reason to do it. So that's why I created this look back at a classic, well, actually, the Cage Match, album Cage Match. So tonight, we have an interesting matchup. Two albums that, when they came out, I was big fans of. Both albums were dominating in their impact on me when they both came out. One came out in 1980, the other one in 1981. The first one I went and got because I saw it and thought it was a cool cover. And the first weekend chance I had, I went and bought it. The other one I heard it on the radio when I was at the gym training. I left the gym after I was finished training and went on the subway downtown to Sam's, the record man, and bought the album right there. So our album Cage Match for tonight features Black Sabbath's Heaven and Hell, released in 1980, featuring Ronnie James Dio on lead vocals, Tony Iommi on guitar, Geezer Butler on bass, and Bill Ward on the drums. Great album. Its opponent for the evening was released in 1981, Ozzy Osbourne's debut album called The Blizzard of Oz, featuring Ozzy Osbourne on vocals, Randy Rhodes on guitar, Bob Daisley on bass, and Lee Kerslake from Uriah Heep on the drums. Smashing album this one was. So there you have it. Those are the two combatant albums tonight. There's a bit of history between these two albums, and part of the reason I chose them is I like to choose things that happen when I'm choosing two albums for this. I like to have albums that have some commonality about them, but are different. The commonality, of course, is that of Ozzy Osbourne. Ozzy Osbourne was the lead singer for Black Sabbath. He left the group, went solo. His first album, this one, The Blizzard of Oz. His replacement, Ronnie James Dio, my favorite vocalist of all time, takes over lead vocals for Black Sabbath's Heaven and Hell a year before this album. So there's your main commonality. They're both heavy metal. I guess people from nowadays might not consider them heavy metal, but they were heavy metal when they came to me, and that's the way I think of both of them. Both have excellent musicianship on them. They both are somewhat dark, as most Sabbath and anything related to it are. They feature two prominent vocalists, with Ronnie James Dio from Rainbow taking over the vocals here. His very, operatic voice dominating this album and bringing back Sabbath from the dead. Basically, Sabbath looked like they were finished after Ozzy left, and they came back with this album and proved that they are not dead. And in fact, I think this album is the strongest of all their albums. Of course, I'll have people will debate that till I'm blue in the face. Ozzy went on his own, hit a home run with this one, right out of the park. The next album out, he also hit a home run with. But this one, he brought on board with him Quiet Riot's guitar player, Randy Rhodes, who became a household name because of this album. Randy Rhodes, great guitar player. So the commonality is they're both heavy metal. They both have roots within each other. They both came out roughly the same time. I think Ozzy's album, if I'm not correct, it doesn't say on here. get my glasses out. There are 8 tracks on the Black Sabbath album. I do not know exactly. I think, yeah, there's 9 tracks on this. And this particular album, because I just got it not too long ago, I had owned this album in LP form and had worn it out, and it went the way of the dinosaur with the rest of my album collection, and I never replaced it until recently. I bought this version of it. So, and I've listened to this in its entirety a couple times since I got it. I hadn't listened to the entire album since about the mid 80s. Yes, I had a few tracks on tape, and I had a track here and there on a live album I was listening to and stuff. And of course, you hear Crazy Train and I Don't Know on the radio all the time. And I also had an EP album that came with that also featured Mr. Crowley live and Suicide Solution live, which are 2 tracks on here and are probably the better versions of the song. So this one has some killer tracks on it. And so I listened to it and I remembered, wow, I forgot how good this album was. Now, this album isn't a master album for me. Probably could have been and probably should be. Given time, it'll probably get that again. It's just that I disappeared from the album for so long that it's hard to consider it a master album. In its time period, if I had had mastered albums back then, I'm sure it would have been one. But it's not there yet. But I have a feeling it will get put in the master albums not too long in the future. And this has really opened the door for Ozzy to come back into my life, because I basically have done nothing and listened to nothing by him in decades. I kind of lost interest after Randy Rhodes died. I didn't really appreciate the fact that he did that Speak of the Devil album, playing all of that Black Sabbath stuff. I thought he was taking a shot at the band, and I didn't really respect him for it. Then he fired. Well, he didn't fire, but at the time we didn't know. He let Lee Kerslake and Bob Daisley go after the next album. So he wasn't really in my sights. And then that Bark of the Moon album was, to me, a drop. Fair significant drop. Not a bad album, but a fair significant drop. And I just gave up on him at that point. Now, with his former band, this was a marriage made in heaven and hell. Sorry, that was kind of a cheap way of using a pun. But adding Ronnie James Dio, a vocalist I had never really heard before of, was the best thing this group ever did. That guy was amazing. I loved his vocals right from the start. I started listening to all kinds of stuff that I could find with him on it. This was one of my favorite albums of this 1980. Great album. And for those of you watching my series, I'm kind of giving it away a bit. But however, fantastic album. Lots of really killer tracks on here. I bought this album as an LP. I've owned it as a cassette. And upon giving up my album collection when I left home, this was one of the first albums I bought in cassette. I had it for about 4 or 5 years. Saw it when I was out one day and bought it again. Had to have it. To me, it's one of the great rock albums of all time. So there's a little bit of history on both of those albums and my personal history with them. So if you're doing combat, you have to know the players. So Ozzy Osbourne was the lead vocalist on this album, and he does a hell of a job. His voice is perfect for the music. He was a great singer with Black Sabbath, and his voice was perfect for that as well. But as a solo artist, he really came into his own here. He's up against Ronnie James Dio, though, arguably the greatest heavy metal vocalist of all time. Certainly, he's my favorite vocalist, period. Genres nodding. notwithstanding. He has great vocal range. He can sing. He could sing the phone book, and it'd be okay with me. So Ozzy's really in tight here against his opponent. Tony Iommi, one of the great riff masters of all time. Some of the greatest riffs of all time, at least in the heavy metal genre, have come out of the guitar of Tony Iommi. Just a great musician. Can't say enough about him. I think he's a legend for a reason. Up against the up-and-coming Randy Rhodes at this time. Randy Rhodes made a huge impact on this album and its subsequent Diary of a Madman. And as you know, he didn't live after that. He died. It was a short career, but had such a huge impact. Such a great guitar player. He's second to nobody, I think. Then we come up against the bass players. Geezer Butler, one of the great bass players of heavy metal, against Bob Daisley. Both are great music writers. There's been discussions over who wrote a lot of the Sabbath stuff early on. Most people feel it was Geezer Butler. Some people say it's Ozzy, but I don't know. Ozzy always seemed completely out of it. I don't know that he was much of a writer. I find it hard to believe that he wrote some of the stuff that I've seen. Maybe he was fine early on, but I don't believe he wrote a lot of the stuff even on the Osbourne album. I think that a lot of that was written by Geezer as well. I don't know for sure, but that's my sneaking opinion here. But Bob Daisley is a great bass player. He co-wrote most of the stuff on these albums and the music as well. So right up there. Then you have the drummers. You have Bill Ward, who is, to me, very underrated drummer. Initially with this band, with Black Sabbath, I think he was the driving force, the most talented of the three instrumentalists in the band. But he had problems as well. But he also could sing, which people didn't realize. And he was a good singer too, I think. Anyways, legend Bill Ward up against Lee Kerslake of Uriah Heep. Uriah Heep fame, another very good drummer. So all of the instrumentalists involved in these two albums, I think, are top shelf for the genre they're in. And so what else? I love the cover of this one. It sparks of anti-Christianity and devil and all kinds of scary things. Whereas this album also has that same kind of impact. You got three angels here smoking, I'm going to assume they're cigarettes. But both these albums are kind of anti-Christian, I think. Well, at least they portray that, whether they actually are or not, who knows. But very dark, both of them. The songs on Heaven and Hell. Now, when Heaven and Hell came out, it didn't immediately make a huge impact. This is more of a legacy album. It came on and has now become a bit of a legacy album for this group, opening the door for Ronnie James Dio, and a lot of people feel that this is one of the great rock and roll albums. But at the time, it didn't really have a huge impact. This one, on the other hand, had a massive impact when it came out. So the big songs on here for me are Neon Nights, Heaven and Hell, Children of the Sea, Wishing Well, and Die Young. To me, these are all top shelf Black Sabbath songs. The other songs on the album, Lady Evil, Walk Away, and Lonely Is the Word, are all good songs. Like, they're solid. This album is a solid album and is number 5 on my all-time. Is it number 5? Yeah, it's number 5 on my all-time favorite list. This album has some great tracks, other than the ones you hear on the radio all the time. Crazy Train and I Don't Know, which I Don't Know was probably my favorite track when I was listening to this album years ago. But there's also Suicide Solution, Mr. Crowley, both top shelf songs here. No Bone Movies, another really good track. Steal Away the Night, that's a pretty heavy and underrated track as well. This particular album has 3 bonus tracks. One is You Looking at Me, Looking at You, non-album side B. Goodbye to Romance, the live version, I believe. It's a remix live version. And then I can't even make out the last one. RR1, I think that's what it's called. But also, like you have a little acoustic bit on this album by, it's a classical guitar bit done by Randy Rhodes to show his talents. And you have the other song, Goodbye to Romance, which may be the weakest song on the album, but I never, when I first had it, I liked it. Doesn't have the longevity of some of these other songs. So you got 2 pretty heavyweight albums here. So this battle is probably going to go down to right to the end of this stream. I'm hoping that people will enjoy this video. And then I will try, if able to, if I get any kind of votes here, I will try to see which one of these albums is going to win the battle. I know personally which album I like the most, but it's not as cut and dry as it was 6 months ago when I didn't own the Blizzard of Mars. But now that I own it, I remember how good it was. The other big difference between the 2 albums is that I find this to be more pure heavy metal, where this has what a lot of Black Sabbath albums have, which is a kind of a bluesy overtone to it. There's not as much of it on this album as their predecessors, but pretty solid metal, but with a kind of a bluesy overtone, where you don't get that really on the Aussie. Maybe get a little bit of classical part on the Aussie one, but very, very different sounding that way. So pretty strong albums, I think. This album, my apologies. This album, of course, I got when it came out, so I've had it now for 42 years. There's there's been a very small period of time where I didn't own it. So I had it in vinyl from the time I got it in 1980 until I moved out in 1985, and I played it fairly regularly then. Then I got it in cassette once I gave the vinyls away, and I had that for a while. Probably maybe about, I'm trying to think of when it might have, I think it went south once I got married. So I probably had that for another 10 or 11 years. Then I got married, and one day I was out shopping and I bought it again. So it might have had a 2-year hiatus. And then it's been regularly played since that point in time. So about the last 24 years, I played it fairly regularly. When I say regular, I mean it'll get played on average a couple times a month, which is quite a bit when you're listening to a lot of stuff. And it's still in my top 5. So to me, it's one of the greatest rock albums of all time. This one, played it a lot from the first 2 years I had it, 81, 82, along with the second album, Diary of a Madman. Played them both quite a bit. I still like this one better. I know some people have gone on to think that Diary of the Madman is a better album, and that's individual taste, but I still like this one better. And it was part of a regularly played for me up until I left home. And then once I got rid of it, I have to say I had thoughts about getting it on several occasions, but always something new would come along and I'd go for that instead. So it had a good lengthy period of time where I didn't listen to all the tracks on it. Now, I did have a CD, I had a cassette, which I still have somewhere in the house, of an interview with Ozzy Osbourne at the time. And on that is 3 tracks from this album. One was I Don't Know, Suicide Solution, and No Bone Movies were the 3 tracks I have on this CD. And there's also one Black Sabbath one, which he does, called the first Black Sabbath song off of the very first album, just called Black Sabbath. He sang that one on that cassette, and I still have it. So I played that fairly regularly up until it's kind of gotten so worn, and then I stopped playing cassettes altogether. So he did get some play during that time period, and of course whatever I heard on the radio. But now that the album is back, it's not suffering from the jet lag and burnout that it once did when I had given it away. So it's not fresh, but it's not suffering from burnout, where this one is getting a bit burned. It's going on 40 years of almost continuous play. Sometimes I feel it's a bit burned out, as all my top 5 are. They're all kind of burned out now because I played them so much. But nothing more than the Kiss albums, which I just literally played round the clock. I'm not lying if I say that some of those albums were played over 1,000 times. Anyways, that's my history and my knowledge and what I know about these 2 albums and how they relate to each other. And I know who I would vote for, but it isn't up to me to make that decision. So anybody that wants to vote for this one or the Blizzard of Oz, for Heaven and Hell or the Blizzard of Oz, those are your choices. So the 2 bands, I'll just talk about the 2 bands now for a while. Black Sabbath, of course, we all know, came out in late 1960s and released their debut album in 1970 and played with Ozzy Osbourne until 1978, when he subsequently left the band after their Never Say Die album and eventually formed his own group, which was supposed to be called the Blizzard of Oz, and then the record label wanted it to be called Ozzy Osbourne because that makes sense. He was the name. So anyways, back to Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath then had got Ronnie James Dio to replace him. Bill Ward then left the band next with personal issues and was replaced by Vinny Appice, who became the drummer on the Mob Rules album. They also were on the live album together. And then they had a falling out and broke up. And I thought, oh, that's it again. Wow, just when they were getting good again. And then they did the unthinkable and they hired Ian Gillan from Deep Purple. And this does not look like a match. Deep Purple's lead vocalist and Black Sabbath. To me, even though they were part of the big 3, Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, and Black Sabbath, the three heavy ones, I just didn't see Ian Gillan fitting in that band. And then they produced that album, which was murky, and the cover was a little bit not that great at the time. It took a lot of heat and a beating for that. But the songs were amazing. And I thought, wow, this is great. They've come back even yet again to make even another strong album. And then he left. Seems that that's what happens with these guys. And then they went on with Tony Martin and eventually did another album with Dio, and then eventually did another album with Ozzy. But they've had more master albums for me than any other group. So they've had a very significant career in my estimation, not just for me, but for a lot of people. Ozzy's a bit of a different story. Ozzy came out like gangbusters. Those first 2 albums were as strong as anything that's out there. I like them both quite a bit. 2 of my favorite heavy metal band albums. But he lost the one piece that we didn't know how important it was until he lost it, and that was Randy Rhodes. When he died, kicked the other 2 members out. So after the Diary of a Madman, which was a great album as well, there was nobody from the group anymore, just him. Later, we found out that his wife, Sharon Osbourne, had a lot to do with a lot of this. So anyways, and then for me, he faded. Now he's released a lot of albums over the last 3 or 4 decades, but I have a couple of them, but I haven't really listened to them. To me, it just whatever magic he had on the Blizzard of Oz and Diary of Madman is gone. He just doesn't have it. And to be honest with you, I don't think he personally has it anymore, nor do I really want much to do with anybody like Sharon Osbourne for the things that I think that she did. So anyways, so 2 very different histories, but they all both started out, these 2 albums both started out in a perfect spot, doing unbelievable things. So for me, 2 really great albums, you know. So now Ozzy is. The funny part is that Dio went back with Sabbath and they were touring together. This was late in their career. But they also decided they were going to tour with Ozzy Osbourne. So when they toured with Ozzy Osbourne, they called the band Black Sabbath. And when they toured with Ronnie James Dio, they took the title of this album, Heaven and Hell. So they were Heaven and Hell with Dio and Black Sabbath with Ozzy. When they were touring, that is. And they toured quite a bit with both. And then they made an album with, after Ronnie James passed away and they stopped touring as Heaven and Hell, they started doing an album, and they did an album called 13 with Ozzy back as the lead vocalist. They didn't have Bill back, though. So to me, it would have been nice if they'd had Bill, because then it could have been like an original band all back together performing again. But Bill didn't play, and now he wants to play, but I don't think that they're in a position to do anything else now. They're all pushing well into the 70s now, so I don't know if they would want to go back and do another album. But I think if they did, there would be a very well-received album, no matter what, because they can do so much to fix the album. Even if people's skills have eroded a bit, they can still fix the album and bring out enhance the best qualities of the group. Whether that happens or not, I'm not really sure if it will. Either way, Ozzy will continue doing his solo stuff, and Sabbath may actually be finished. It's hard to say. So, I decided to do these episodes at 8 o'clock on a Sunday because it gives a chance for the Australian people who are regular viewers of mine to come and watch if they wish to. I will be doing another one. I'm just trying to do them every second week of the month, but because of the new show I have, which is Ben's Album Challenge, there may be a conflict, so I may do them either the second or third week. I decided to do this one this week because I have Ben's Album Challenge next Sunday to do. And so anyways, here we are. So, wow. A bit of a tiring day, all of those videos and all of that food that I've been cooking, and I'm still waiting for it to cook. I turned it off while I'm on here. I'll turn it back on, finish it off, and then have my supper after this. But it's been a fun and productive day. I did get this book by Pete Townsend. I've read it before, but I never finished it. So I saw it at the one of the used bookstores nearby, and I said, yeah, I got to have that. So that's a good read. He's a very, very knowledgeable man. I may actually get into this one. This is on my agenda to read. I tend to read about 15 books at a time, but that's my limit, 15 books at a time. So as soon as one of them gets done, I'll add a book to it. Pretty much the same way I am with the playlist. I only ever have 20 albums on the playlist, never any more. because even 20 is a lot. I thought about reducing it to 15, but 20 is a pretty good number, right? Usually an album will get on a playlist like that will get played at least once every 8 or 9 days, which is pretty good. Some of the other albums, the one-offs, they get played once and then they're back on the shelf for another 2 months or whatever. So both of these albums, The Blizzard of Oz and Heaven and Hell, I've listened to Blizzard of Oz in the last couple of weeks. Heaven and Hell, I'll probably listen to them both over the next couple of days too, because I got them out and I like both of them quite a bit. So there we are, the halfway point of the show. Will Ozzy and Black Sabbath ever do anything else together? Now, it's been 9 years since they did the last album. And, that seems like a lot, but to be honest with you, a lot of groups go longer than that between albums now. You can almost forget that the group exists. Look at Peter Gabriel for, it's been over, I'm going to say it's been more than a decade and a half since he's released an album. And he's been talking about it all year this year. There's been lots of talk about it this year, but I haven't seen anything. I'm hoping it'll happen, but you never know. And then you have bands there are some bands that are still making albums that, to be honest with you, they should pack it in because they haven't made a good one for a long time. I'm not going to get into any names, but we kind of know who some of those bands are. There's bands that I wish would just get back together and do one more album because we've been waiting for decades and decades for these guys to get the better, and I think we know what we're talking about too. So, but and then you have bands like my favorite band that the drummer's gone and they will never do anything under that label again because they were only ever just the three of them. I mean, yeah, there was one guy on the very first album, but pretty much it's been the same three guys for 45 years. They won't break with that. Zeppelin's kind of like that too. So for guitar solos, I think Iommi's guitar solos are slower and methodical, but memorable. I think Randy is faster, and his guitar solos, I think, are probably off the charts. He's probably overall maybe a better lead guitarist than Tony Iommi, but definitely Tony Iommi has the masterpiece when it comes to the riffing. Just a super riff guitar player. I've heard some of the Black Sabbath live too. It's quite good. I think if I was going to do another matchup between these two, it would have been their two live albums that came out the same year too. I actually considered doing that, but the reason I decided to do these two instead of those two is that I'm much, much more familiar with both of these albums than I am with either of those live ones. I've heard both of them a couple of times, but I wouldn't say that I'm comfortable with my knowledge of either one of them yet. To be honest, my loyalty probably still falls to Black Sabbath just because I've loved just about everything they've done that I've heard. There's some of the Tony Martin stuff I don't own or haven't owned. So I need to, sorry, this came off of. It looks like it's off one of my containers here. Oh, it's off the bottom corner. I didn't even see that. Okay, but anyways, yeah, some really, really good music coming out of Sabbath. They probably should be higher on my list of bands, but it's not like they're being beaten out by slouches. Like they're in sixth place behind Styx, The Who, Genesis, Yes, and Rush, and they're not far behind Styx. Probably have a lot more albums that are master albums than Styx. It's just for whatever reason, Styx has that vocal trio, and still have a vocal trio that that just capture my attention so easily. Some of the best vocalists in rock are all in that band, right? And even though they don't have maybe the master albums that Sabbath have, their albums never seem to dip. Styx albums never dip. Lately, they have been Grand Illusion for sure, but Equinox has really come on for me. And so, so they're close. Two of them are pretty close. The Who isn't about their albums anyways. The Who is about the live venue. That's the biggest thing about the Who that I like, and the reason why they're so high up. Genesis and Yes and Rush, of course, it's the music, but I also love Rush because of their hometown. From my hometown, the things they sing about, I relate to much easier. I love everything about them. But Sabbath is definitely there. They're definitely in the group of 8, and they've been in that group of 8 probably longer than any other band. Because Yes didn't get into my favorite bands until probably about 81 or 82. Rush didn't come on until after Permanent Waves in 1980. But Sabbath was already up there when that happened. They were the band fighting it out with Kiss for number 1 spot. And then both got pole vaulted by Rush. Yeah, back in those days. Yeah, one of the longest continuous bands for me. Definitely. So, I know I'm yawning a lot. It's been a long day, and I didn't sleep too well last night. So, I was up earlier too, so it's starting to wear on me. But it's been fun. I like doing this challenge. I thought this would be interesting to do these 2 albums. Both trying to outdo each other. I'm glad Sabbath stayed together instead of melting into oblivion after Ozzy left. I think they probably thought that they should, because they didn't release an album in 79. And after Never Say Die didn't look like promising. A lot of them had some issues going on, drug issues and stuff. But they were lucky to get Ronnie James Dio, because I think he really helped pull this whole thing back together and put it back on the board. And not only put it on the board, I think it's better than what they were doing before. Although I know there'll be people that'll argue with me till I'm blue in the face about that one. For many Black Sabbath fans, there's only one vocalist, and that's this guy. For me, I like Dio better than I ever liked Ozzy. That's never going to change. Ozzy just hasn't got the vocal talents that Ronnie James Dio has, and I probably will take a bit of a hit for that too, but I'm sorry, but that's the truth. He's just a better vocalist. And some people say, yeah, but he doesn't sing the Sabbath stuff as well as Ozzy did. Well, to be honest with you, Ozzy doesn't sing the Sabbath stuff as well as Ozzy did either. So, that doesn't have the best of memory, but I think Dio did a hell of a good job on some of those Sabbath stuff on that Live Evil album. Some of the stuff that Ozzy was doing. And to his credit too, he stuck with the band, and people started accepting him as being the guy, right? For such a small guy with such a powerful voice. Oh, yeah. Getting there. So what else can I say? For me, if I could go back, I would have liked to have seen more stuff by Dio with the Black Sabbath. Even though I would have missed out on the Ian Gillan era, which was great, I still think that if Black Sabbath had gotten a couple more albums with Dio, they really could have cemented themselves being my top 2 or 3. As for Ozzy, the loss of Randy Rhodes cannot be overstated. If his wife wasn't so influencing as well, The other two guys probably would have stayed. We could have seen half a dozen albums as put Ozzy right in the stratosphere, maybe right up there in my top 10. But now he's barely hanging on to a top 50 spot now because for me, he hasn't produced anything in 40 years. Even though people say, oh yeah, he's got lots of albums. Well, I've listened to a couple of them. I can't even remember anything about them, to be honest with you. They're not memorable in the least. So we got another 20 minutes. So Randy Rhodes, so he died from a plane crash. I think it was him from the plane crash. So many of these guys die in these crashes. I can't remember exactly who died in what kind of a crash. But he was, without a doubt, an up-and-coming guitar player in the same kind of style that you heard Eddie Van Halen playing, but he took it further. There's a lot more of that shredding going on than he was with Eddie Van Halen. Now, I'm not suggesting he's better than Eddie Van Halen because I'm not stupid. I think he was a great guitar player. He'll never be fully appreciated because he just died too young, and we only got a small amount of stuff from him, which is unfortunate. Kind of like Hendrix in a way. Oop. Hit that wrong button. Can't be doing that. Gotta watch that. Anyways, yeah, it's just unfortunate that he had to go so young. And because I think if they'd kept him in the band, and even if they could have kept Lee Kerslake and Bob Daisley, this band could have produced a half a dozen albums that rival the Blizzard of Oz. Then they would have been very memorable. But a couple albums is still better than none, right? And some of the stuff that came out after Randy died and the other guys were gone, it's not terrible. Not terrible, but it's very average. It's not special. It's not like this album or Diary of a Madman. Where same kind of thing can be said for Black Sabbath too. They produced Heaven and Hell and then The Mob Rules are very, very good albums. But unlike Ozzy, when Dio left there and once Randy was gone from there, they did the Speak of the Devil, which did really well. They did a live album with Dio, which did really well. Then that's it for me. For Ozzy, he just fell off the planet and just never recovered fully from it, in my opinion. Whereas Sabbath came right back with Ian Gillan and did a great, great album after that. However, at this point, I would have rather have had both groups stay with exactly the lineups they had on these two albums. We could have seen some really great albums from both bands. But we'll never know, right? Now that Dio's gone, we'll never know. So, one of the tracks on this album here, Walk Away, that one was played quite a bit on the radio. I think was supposed to be the single, but it's very unrepresentative of the album. It sounds different than most of the rest of the songs. Whereas Crazy Train was the big song on this album and is very, very well, represents this album very well. Most of the stuff sounds like that. That's the difference between the two albums as far as I'm pretty sure the Blizzard of Oz probably sold more than Heaven and Hell. I'd have to look it up, but I don't know for sure. But the funny part is that as big as this album was with its hits and everything, I still think people liked this album better. That's just my opinion. But I guess we'll find that out. If we get some people to vote, then we'll do it. And if they can't vote on this live stream, the video will be out there for people to watch later and decide what they want to vote for. So if you can't make it to the live stream or you're not on the live stream, and I'm not going to take a census yet because frankly there's nobody to take it from, but if people want to vote later and then once it gets enough hits, I'll make a decision like how long to keep it going, and then after that we'll give a verdict on it. Put those away. Don't think I need them anymore. So we may cut out a bit early since I haven't got anybody. I'm going to give it another 5 minutes or so because I want to get that turkey cooked before midnight. Otherwise, I won't get to eat. And they're waiting to turn it on now. So I told them I'd cut it a little bit shorter than normal. So we'll give it till about 10:02 tonight. And then we'll try to do another one of these next month, but I'll be giving lots of notice about it from now on. I think the best thing to do is mention it on the Sunday before, and then the Sunday you're doing it. And I may mention it briefly on other Sundays as well, when I might be able to do it. I decided this week because there's a chance I may go away in the next couple of weekends, or the next weekend or so, and I'm not sure when that'll be, because I know next weekend we'll be doing Ben's album challenge, which has done very well. It's making me think that I should make it a weekly show, but it really comes down to having the time to listen to an album 5 times in a week before I'm ready. That's how much time I feel I need to properly prepare myself for an album that I'm not familiar with. Whereas this, I like doing this because I'm very familiar with every album I've done so far. And the next challenge, so I wanted to do the first one I did, for some reason I can't even find the video here, but the Black Sabbath and the Who albums, Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin. Very rock, like hard rock albums. And then the next two were very, can't remember the next two were. The last two, last week, the last month, with Styx and Kansas were very, I would call American prog, American rock, American pop. And I did the one with Yes, that was a Yes and Rush, that's the prog one. Now we got a heavy metal one. But I think we're probably going to do a prog one next. But I think I'm going to do something I haven't done, which will be 2 prog bands, albums that are really good, but these bands never really made it big. And I think I know the 2 bands I want to choose. I just have to find something that really matches between them if I can. I have an idea what that might be, but I'm not 100% sure yet. So we will wait and see how that's going to work out. So we got a few minutes left. I hope that everybody's having a great Thanksgiving weekend if you're in Canada. And if you're elsewhere in the world, I hope that the weather's great and you're having a good time and that you had a great summer, or if you're in a part of the world where the summer is just coming, I hope you have a great summer. If you're in the part of the world where the summer's just gone, I hope you had a great summer. You know, I think North America may be the only place where they have, we have a, what do they call? Where we have daylight savings time. I don't think they do it anywhere else in the world, just here for some reason. They've actually talked about doing away with it too, but who knows what they'll do away with and what they won't. They want to do away with a lot of stuff, but people are really strong about not giving up their history, I guess is the best way to put it. So we're coming down to the last minute here tonight. I hope everybody gets a chance to watch this video and maybe gives us an opinion on either of the 2 albums. And I'm just going to let people know one more time. The albums were Black Sabbath, Heaven and Hell, which came out, I'm going to hold it here, which came out in 1980 and featured Ronnie James Dio on vocals, Tony Iommi on guitar, Geezer Butler on drums, and Geezer Butler on bass and Bill Ward on the drums. Geezer, I almost scared you there. And Ozzy Osbourne's Blizzard of Oz came out in 1981, featured Ozzy on lead vocals, Randy Rhodes, the late Randy Rhodes on guitar, Bob Daisley on bass, and Lee Kerslake on the drums. And there you have it. Those were the 2 albums in the album challenge. I'll give it till next time when we do another live stream to give you a verdict on who wins. So you have yourself a good Sunday night and have yourself a great weekend. Bye.